I don't know much about you guys, so and I don't know much about Bitcoin, which is I know enough to be dangerous, but I've never used a Bitcoin. I bet how many people have never used a Bitcoin? Yeah, I'm a pretty good proxy for the geeks in the room.
Okay.
We've heard about it. We know it's important. We know that there's a lot of money trading hands somewhere.
So you've never been on Silk Road buying illegal drugs or anything like that?
No, see, we have VCs in Silicon Valley for that. Seriously. Where do you think Steve Jobs got his LSD?
Oh, really? I think is that out on Twitter now?
Pretty much. So introduce yourself for a few seconds and tell me who you are.
Sure. Chris Larson, CEO of Ripple Labs. We're the company that's building the code for the Ripple protocol, which is sort of a second generation of the sort of Bitcoin idea.
My name is Adam B. Levine. I'm a writer and speaker who does a twice-weekly show about Bitcoin at letstalkbitcoin.com. Rather than focusing on the technical side, I like to focus on the ideas, people, and projects that are powering basically what I like to call the new digital economy.
Gary Krem, an entrepreneur in the Valley, started Match.com, Sex.com, Clean Power Finance, and focusing on interesting innovations in finance.
Very cool. So what, for the people who don't really know, might have heard Bitcoin on the news, but don't really know what it is, what is it?
Can I take this?
Absolutely.
Great. So Bitcoin is basically cash that lives on the internet. When you do a transaction in real life with like a check, you are essentially putting your entire financial information, your entire financial identity with that payment, because without that financial identity, the payment might not go through. And then who would, how would that work? There have to be these identity ties in it in order for it to work. Yeah. This is even worse with credit cards, because credit cards, when you make a purchase online, you're not only sending your entire financial identity and your billing information, but you're also giving them, in plain text most of the time, the credit card information, the confirmation code, the security measures. So anybody who can access that information stored online can essentially make fraudulent transactions on your behalf. Think about cash transactions now, person to person. If I give you $5, then that's $5 that went through with no name attached to it necessarily, no identity, no billing address. It happened instantly, and bottom line, it's fast and it's cheap and it's easy. So Bitcoin is a lot like that, except you can, instead of having to make a person-to-person transaction with cash, you can do it online with anyone connected to the internet at any time. And that's a really interesting thing, because if Einstein was going to design cash, this is the cash that he would have designed. It's cash that doesn't respect the boundaries of relativity, doesn't respect the boundaries of time, doesn't respect the boundaries of space. And so if I send a Bitcoin payment to somebody in Tunisia, then they'll have it within minutes, but I can send it to them at 3 a.m. And it's secured even if they're not awake to receive it, because it's protected by their password that I don't ever have access to.
I would agree. I mean, definitely motherhood and apple pie on that. There's some strengths to it, and I think Bitcoin is one of many potential, what they call anonymous cryptocurrency solutions. I mean, Chris could probably weigh in on some of the strengths and weaknesses, because it's subtle. There's a lot of subtleties behind it.
How do I use Bitcoin? How do I get Bitcoin?
There's going to be ATMs today, for example, that have Bitcoins. There's exchanges,
give me an example of where I could go on the internet.
You could go Google Bitcoin exchanges. You can somehow get some USD or some currency, and people can give you Bitcoin, which is just a string of numbers, really. As is all cryptocurrencies, they're numbers.
Just to pick up on what Gary was talking about, so we think this is a really huge innovation, really a game changer in finance. Really think about finance. It has actually not changed very much at all in the 20 years of the internet. Lots of other things have changed fundamentally. Finance has not. Our financial system is still a 40-year-old system, pre-internet, that's country by country, tons of restrictions. Every time you cross a border, you're paying some kind of a translation fee, an exchange fee, an interchange fee. So not much has changed. Bitcoin has come along, and I think it's fundamentally shown the way to a new system of global finance. That's what's really cool about Bitcoin. And of course, it's set out really to build a new currency. To build a currency without a central bank. And that's really neat. It was, the objective there was so you couldn't debase a global currency, and they accomplished that. Yeah. But I think that is actually just the beginning. Yeah. So what we see and what Ripple is trying to do is really take that in another direction, which is, I think, complementary to the Bitcoin idea. And that is, if you think about the world, just had this panel talking about Uber and Airbnb. The whole world now is connected with information. People in China and Africa can get access to Airbnb. That's awesome. But when it comes to the exchange of value, they can't do much with that information. People in China on their Android phones can't be hosts on Airbnb simply because there's a payment problem there. People in Africa can't buy Google AdWords in their local currencies. This is a huge problem that we have in the world. So why can't value, think about the exchange of value, move like information? And that's what we really think this technology does. So at Ripple, what we try to do is focus on that aspect, that you can exchange information without a central settlement authority, without a Visa, MasterCard, or PayPal. There's just a global series of peer-to-peer servers will figure out how much value you have in what other currency, how much value I have, and you can make those payments for free in any currency to anybody on Earth.
So
that's a big idea.
let's take it back to first stay with where we are right now, because we're not Bitcoin users. I know Coupa Cafe in Palo Alto takes Bitcoin. How do I pay for it? What do I do? Do I bring a phone in with an app on it? How does money?
Have you ever bought anything with PayPal in a retail establishment?
Yeah, it's basically the same. I mean, the difference is that nobody can freeze your account. Like PayPal can freeze your account if something goes wrong. But I mean, with Bitcoin, that's not the case. But it is very, very simple, and it's getting easier. That's the main thing. There are a lot of people who think that near-field communication is going to be the future for Bitcoin payments in person. And I don't necessarily know if that's true. Right now, the process is if I want to take a payment from someone or send a payment to someone, I pull up a wallet application on my smartphone. These are much more prevalent on Android phones than they are on Apple phones because Apple hasn't been very friendly to anything that lets you do these type of payments. But
because they haven't figured out their cut.
Well, there is. I mean, that's a huge issue here. Is that Bitcoin?
What's their tax?
All along the line makes it very, very difficult for middlemen to be involved with the process. Very much so, it's like a person-to-person transaction. Chris, I actually wanted to ask you a question. If Bitcoin is the evolution of cash, would you say that Ripple is the evolution of credit?
We would say it's the evolution of the exchange of value, so that it could be currency agnostic. The way Ripple works, it's a...
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's like a
really
global ledger, right?
point,
So you
though.
can put anything in it, right? So we think the world should be able to exchange not just a value in Bitcoin or Ripple, we have a math-based currency in the Ripple system, but exchange value in dollars, yuan, yen, renminbi, real, whatever value you have, or make up your own currencies, make up a local currency.
Simplifying that, though, isn't that credit?
Because
you're not really sending dollars through the wires.
You're sending a counterparty value if you're sending something other than a math-based currency, right? And so just to put a point on that, Bitcoin and the math-based currency in Ripple, called Ripples or XRP, those are two math-based currencies. Those are fundamentally different kinds of currencies.
Explain what you mean by math-based, because
it simply means
I know when I have a dollar in my pocket every year, if I keep that dollar, it gets a little bit less valuable, right?
It's because
inflation.
Your dollar is basically a liability to some counterparty, right? Every other currency in the world, any other thing of value, looks like a liability to a counterparty. So it's not just the value, but it's the risk of the counterparty. Cool thing about Bitcoin and Ripple XRP are that they are currencies or value without counterparties. So they're really more akin to assets that just sit in a global ledger that the whole world agrees that that's actually the property. So that's a fundamentally different kind of thing. But you should be able to seamlessly exchange those things of value with no counterparty for anything else that has a counterparty. That's where we're going with this.
I wanted to kind of bounce up. Adam mentioned an interesting thing, how with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, maybe it's tough for the standard distribution models like a middleman or a distributor to get in the way, not in the way, to add value.
Right, yeah.
So that's a challenge to existing stakeholders. Other stakeholders are governments, taxing authorities, others. So I think what's interesting to talk about, what are the barriers to adoption, widespread adoption, which is one, for example, our government views, Bitcoin is just another currency and money exchanges have to be regulated.
Right, I mean, that's the primary thing is that our whole financial system is built around this idea that it's not so much the assets that you own so much as it is your identity that owns them. This is why sometimes you can authorize a party to spend on your behalf. That authorization means that you have effectively given them permission. With Bitcoin, you really can't do that. The authorization is them having the encrypted password, the password to decrypt your ability to spend. But it's all located on your computer. And that's a really important point to kind of get to, is that where with conventional e-commerce systems, you are essentially, every time you make a purchase, giving that vendor and anyone who hacks into their website your entire financial identity. But with Bitcoin, you don't do that. With Bitcoin, you actually send you send the asset, and then they receive the asset. And just like if we had made a cash transaction, it's really fast, it's really cheap, but I
So
can't get it
one of the
reversed.
challenges is there's no consumer protection like
Well,
there is in other
not yet.
spaces.
Not
So
yet.
what does that mean for us?
Well, you know, on your credit card, for example, if there's a dispute with a vendor, you can dispute.
Right.
What if there's no way to dispute? It's too late.
It's too late because cash changed hands.
Exactly.
Cash. The reason I don't carry cash is if I get mugged, and I'm carrying $1,000, that $1,000 gone.
But the
right?
way- the
If
way
you
to-
take
Then on
my
Twitter,
credit
you got
card-
$1,000 in your wallet?
Well, I
No.
don't, not
Okay.
right now. But
the way to
I've
look-
had family members get mugged and they had $500 stolen, right? And now if you use a credit card, you can steal my credit cards all day long. I call the bank and they cancel it. And even if you go in and use it at a store, that's happened, you get your money back, right?
I think we have to look at this is just the beginning, right?
Yeah.
These are free value exchange pipelines that are being built that are going to be free and available to everybody. And you know, sometimes I think we talk about these things in the context of the U.S. That's actually not where these things are most important. They're important in Africa, in India, in China, in South America, places where you have access to a global web of information, but you have no ability to transact and do commerce.
And
where it's
you have
most valuable.
governments, like in Spain, that go and confiscate value, wealth,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely,
And so if you're in a place, we love living in America because generally our government is sort of rational. Sometimes it behaves a little irrationally, but I haven't seen too much wealth confiscation except for in California. But you know, in Spain, I've seen people talking. My family just had all of their money just locked up, right, by the government.
You know, I think you're going to see, again, look at them as pipes, as infrastructure that now is going to turn value like we have information today. And there are going to be a whole series of services like reversibility, people that will vouch for it. You'll have traditional banks that are trusted by their consumers that will just use these pipes seamlessly. A lot of times, I think, in the future, you'll be using a Bitcoin protocol, a Ripple protocol, and you won't even know it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the real power. Just like the way you're using the internet pipes today for information.
Since money is an idea, I mean, really, that piece of paper in your wallet is worthless because it's a piece of paper, right? But because we all accept that that has some value to it, it's an idea. How do you get to Bitcoin to be to the place where everybody in the world trusts it and feels like it's the idea of exchanging value?
I guess
This goes back to, I figure you'll have a follow-up. This goes back to the math-based currency element of it, certainly, because the most appealing part to me about Bitcoin is that it's a rules-based system. So just as a piece of software has rules in it that if you're using the software you can't break, so does Bitcoin. And so that means that you don't have this situation. You know, we talked about the U.S., and Chris is totally right. The U.S. will actually be one of the, the slowest adoption curves for Bitcoin. And it's not because we don't need it. It's not because it's so much more useful other places. It's because we're setting up barriers for it, because our entire system is built around that idea. I forgot what your actual question was.
How do we all get to the point? Because most of this audience, and not me, I've never used Bitcoin.
How do we trust
and
it?
I feel a little untrusty. It's like, oh, there's something on the computer, and it has no governing body. There's
Well, it's
nobody
money
to
you can
yell at.
back up. I mean, first off, it has advantages in much the same way that 30 years ago, if we were talking about email and who would ever want to use email, you look at that situation, and for decades, the U.S. Postal Service in the United States had a complete monopoly on personal correspondence. And then email came out, and suddenly, we're 30 years later, and it's about 99% the other way. 99% of personal correspondence in the United States is done over email rather than through conventional mail. This wasn't because email had a fantastic marketing campaign. It was because it's better in every way that matters. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's less prone to tampering, it's more secure. And this very much so can also be said about Bitcoin, and cryptocurrencies broadly speaking.
I guess where I was coming from is in the early days of Bitcoin, there's been a lot of volatility in the value of it.
Well,
right?
sure.
And that makes me go, is this really going to be around? If I buy $100 of Bitcoin, is my $100 going to be $50 tomorrow or $200? In America, I know that my dollar is going to be worth something tomorrow, right?
So Bitcoin is like a combination, or cryptocurrencies broadly speaking, are a combination of like an IPO, because it does act like a tech stock. Right now it's acting like a tech stock where nobody really knows the valuation and nobody really knows if the service is legal. I mean, how legal is that car service? Uber, thank you, which I used in New York.
Or Flywheel, which is the name of the one you
Flywheel.
can't think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how valuable are those if their service is patently illegal? But if it is legal, then it's pretty valuable.
Yeah.
So I think that you have a lot of that going on, and that will shake itself out over time.
And to get to that point, Uber is illegal in Vancouver, not allowed. Here, allowed, right? And it has value here. how are governments going to react to Bitcoin, and can they do anything to tax it or get involved or shut it down?
You're seeing different approaches throughout the world. Probably Germany is the furthest ahead. It looks like you're actually having German banks supporting infrastructure that's using these new math-based currencies. We think that's really good. I think actually the U.S. is actually coming along. Yeah. So we've spent quite a bit of time with the folks at Treasury and California. Obviously, the big issue in the U.S. is less now about things that would kill this movement, Bitcoin, Ripple, which would be probably in the securities realm that would sort of kill it. It looks like that's waning, and that's good. And it's more in the realm of terrorist financing, money laundering, and financial crimes. And frankly, I mean, that is something that the industry all has to work together on. But I think there's actually a win-win where you can have these systems that will allow global free value exchange like information and will keep law enforcement happy. Because if you really think about these systems, they're actually real-time. They have to broadcast their transactions to the global protocol. So they're actually way more transparent than the current financial systems you have today, where you have to do these suspicious activity reports with B of A. It takes 2 weeks for them to respond. Then they'll find out, well, that value went to Wells Fargo, 2 more weeks. So I think you could actually make the case to law enforcement that these are better systems for tracking the bad guys. Yeah. And we have to go in that direction.
Yeah. If all the currencies are used to buy, drugs and guns, they're probably not going to have traction. But if there's a buy-in by law enforcement and taxing authorities and people who regulate money exchange, just like they regulate cash today, we'll see wider adoption.
We're in money, finance, and value exchange. We're 20 years behind information. Right? Yeah. It's taken 2 decades now, and this is just beginning. So this is like, this is like 94.
And that was where my next question was, okay, I can use it at Coupa Cafe, but I can't use it very many other places. And most of the people in this room haven't even tried it yet, so I probably can't exchange Bitcoin with most people in the room, at least not yet. Maybe by the end of the talk, maybe.
They might be using Bitcoin right now. You don't know it. There might be some intermediaries some of you are using that are transmitting Bitcoin between their suppliers. You really don't know. Think about it again as the pipes.
But how does it spread through society? How do we get more endpoints where we can convert Bitcoin into other forms of value, like a muffin?
You need a developer community, right? I mean, there's a huge developer community on Bitcoin.
SDKs, APIs, things like that.
There's now we've now open sourced the Ripple protocol. You can get it at GitHub. It's just open. Developers can take it, do whatever they want with it. So you're getting a developer community that is pretty much stymied by the incumbents in the current financial system. If you want to start a lending company, and I've done it, I ran a company called eLoan and Prosper many years ago. If you want to start one of those companies, you have to go beg for permission from an existing bank to borrow their charter. You can't get a charter. You can't actually innovate in finance. But with these new protocols, Bitcoin and Ripple, go to town. It's there. You can build whatever you want. And that's really the power that's going on here. This is a real game changer.
What should we be watching for in the Bitcoin world or the math-based currency world over the next 12 months?
Can I tell you some of the exciting things that are coming?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. There's some really exciting things coming. My focus primarily is on content monetization and on improving the way that we do business on the web. That's my personal passion because I've been making podcasts and things like that since 2005. One of the things that's going to be happening probably in the next 18 months is the way that we view display advertising is going to become Bitcoin enabled. And what this means is that right now when you look at a billboard on a website, it can really convince you that you want to buy the product. It can absolutely try to sell it to you, but at the end of the day, you can't give it money and it can't take your purchase. You have to actually leave what you're doing, go to a different website, and so that means that these ads aren't very effective because they're asking you to disrupt what you're doing in order to do something else and then pay them money. So with Bitcoin-enabled ads, you can essentially generate a unique payment address for each person that looks at the ad and tie it to either their account or their IP information or whatever sort of identifying information, at which point, if any payment is sent to that address, whether by them or by someone else, it knows who you are, and it can, if it's a digital item, start downloading immediately without ever having left the page that you were already looking at, or if it's a physical item and you have an address on file, it can automatically ship it to you.
Yet another piece of Minority Report ever arrives, right?
But that's actually a really important part because identity, again, is so important here. This is why there's a conflict with the current financial system because our current financial system is tied entirely to your financial identity, your real social security number identity, and Bitcoin isn't. Bitcoin, every time you have a public address, which is an address that you can receive money to, that can be an entirely separate identity. And it doesn't have to be, you can, so on the one hand, that means that you can have a bunch of identities and do all sorts of shady stuff. But on the other hand, it means that if you want to verify that this is really me and it has my social security number attached to it, you just associate those two things together. And there will be services that do this. And so you'll be able to verify that you have a social security number and it's been verified that that's you without ever showing it to anybody. And that's incredible.
We have a couple minutes left. I'd love to get you guys involved because I haven't had all my questions answered. So if you have a question, just pop up to the microphone here, and we'll take it in the last couple. Yeah, here we go.
Seeing as Bitcoin is primarily a transactional currency, in that it's a terrible store of value, it's primarily for transaction. Do you see it takes 10 minutes to complete a Bitcoin transaction. So do you see that as a barrier to adoption? And when the difficulty gets high enough, will people stop trying to mine Bitcoins and then kind of undermine the entire system?
There were a couple of parts to that question.
And what is mining?
Yeah, well, we're not even going to get into that. Okay, well, the short version of mining is the process that currently in the United States is performed by the Federal Reserve and Treasury, which is currency issuance, and monitoring the money supply. It is transactions, transaction processing in much the same way that Visa and MasterCard does. And it's also fraud prevention that goes all the way back to the very beginning. So that's a process that anyone can participate in, given that they have the right hardware. 2 years ago, we'd be having the conversation, and it would be about CPUs. But now it's about specific hardware units. So anyways.
But really important, though, I want to point out the bigger innovation that's gone on here is confirmation without a central clearinghouse or central bank, right? Yeah. Mining is but one method to do that. Yeah. Ripple actually was built to create a different method for confirmation without central authority. We call it consensus. Consensus process actually takes a matter of seconds. So we think the 10-minute confirmation window was too long. And then there's some other issues. You have to carry the history in mining to do kind of the hashing confirmation, which burns a lot of electricity. We thought you could do it more efficiently with consensus, which is a sort of peer-based, more like the internet. So anyway,
I'd like to respond.
Important to think about those as two different things.
Stay tuned on that 10-minute thing. There's a lot of innovations that make the GUI and the user interaction better as entrepreneurs use different APIs and SDKs to make things better.
Right. Well,
but right now, the experience sucks.
Well, I actually disagree with that, Gary, respectfully. If you go to bitcoinvideopass.com, you'll see a full implementation of a project that we've prototyped that's essentially going to be filming another conference, but that's not the point. The point is that the payment module is embedded on the right-hand side of the description. And you can do all the payment there, and it doesn't take 10 minutes. You send money to it, it takes about 30 seconds to maybe a minute. And I've had transactions, because again, what you're talking about is the process of the transaction being verified, right? The transaction being proven. We guarantee that this transaction actually happened, when really what a merchant is looking for most of the time is a confirmation that it's been sent, that the money was sent. And so all that takes is just it showing up on the network, which is just however long it takes to get to your, how long it gets to take your process.
I think the point is with credit cards today, if that's where you're thinking it's a 2-second thing and 10 minutes, people are making it quick.
But it's a 2-second thing after you've put in all of your information and gone through multiple shopping cart pages.
Unless you have it stored already and you hit a button.
Sure.
Yeah. But even then, you're at the gas pump, it can take 30 seconds before it says, oh, go pump,
And again, like on the gas station thing, I talked with a guy named Andy Schroeder 2 weeks ago who has a functional Bitcoin gas pump that's pumping diesel right now. He's bringing it to another conference at the moment. But again, they're like, and someone mentioned parking meters. And again, there's a guy named Morgan Rockwell up in I think he's in Vancouver, who's working on a project around that right now. So all of these things are in process. And the interesting part is that because the regulation, it's not that there isn't regulation, it's just that it doesn't really work with the way that these new currencies work. And so because of that, there's all this ambiguity about what is or isn't allowable. And that means that if you don't have much to lose, there's really no disincentive to go and just build something, because if it winds up working, then you're great. And if not, then, oh, well, I wasted this, but I got this reputation from doing it, too.
Yeah.
Could I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So when inevitably governments and regulators start getting involved, what would you guys like to see happen, and what would you be afraid would actually happen?
Chris can probably answer this more than I can.
Well, you have to be afraid of, for example, the U.S. There's a great book that just came out called Treasuries War. So we really have to recognize that in the U.S., which is a small part of the global population, they have an incredible influence on global finance. So they don't even have to ban things. What they can do is just make it uncomfortable for incumbents to integrate with these protocols. Right. And that will just tremendously slow adoption. So what you have to do is you have to really meet with Treasury, the terrorist financing, the anti-money laundering folks. We work with Promontory for that very purpose. And you really have to show them that, I mean, they get that there's the potential for goodness here, to make things tremendously more efficient, to save the 10% that the world consumes in remitting money to Mexico and India. It's crazy. So they get there's a benefit there, but if they get the smell that this is going to encourage terrorism or bad things, they can really hurt these systems, even if they can't pass laws to ban them because they are peer-to-peer. It doesn't matter. So we have to face that they're a constituency. We have to work together.
How do you keep a terrorist or a drug dealer from using these systems?
You don't. I mean, that's the fallacy of all of this, is that just as,
I would say you do.
It's an agnostic system, is what it is. Is ultimately, just like TCP/IP, how do you prevent terrorists from having websites? I mean, I guess you police it. I think that's probably the best thing that you can do. But it's not like there's a process where if you're going to go and register a domain, it says, are you going to be a terrorist? Check here, yes or no.
Yeah, this is a good point. These are just pipes. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just like
Although,
the
but
internet.
you can regulate.
There is, they can go to the registers. There's a central registry and a peer-to-peer model. I think we saw in things like eGold, which was an early predecessor to Liberty. If it's not set up right, it primarily goes to the bad folk who use it. Terrorists, child porn,
But
whatever.
you can regulate when
Yeah.
the money gets converted to something else, because
Yes.
generally you want to convert that money to a muffin at Coupa Cafe.
Look,
right?
use Airbnb as an example, right? They're a global company. They have a need for making payments efficient. If the government is getting super negative on these things, they won't be adopted by marketplaces like that, even though the fit is perfect. So that's why this is important. It's really important for utility and adoption.
One last question.
Real
I think we
quickly,
have 1 minute.
to his other point, that Bitcoin isn't a good store of value. I think that right now it's volatile, but Bitcoin inherently is a deflationary currency where the currency issuance over time goes down. So if Bitcoin is going to succeed, Bitcoin will actually be very valuable. It's really a binary outcome. It'll either be worth nothing or it will be worth a whole lot.
Yeah, following up on the previous person's question, and you've said when they see the potential for goodness. My experience in dealing with government and a wide variety of industries all over the world is that oftentimes you focus on avoiding badness and not the goodness part. And so my comment and question is really related, is both regarding government and big business, which is when they get involved, they often screw it up. And I'm a little bit tired of being their, I'm kind of tired of being the schlemazel to their soup spilling schlemiel all the time.
Yeah.
So if you look at, for instance, in a different industry, Siemens was engaged in bribery for years, but they didn't deal with the problem. One thing I'm always worried about is fraud and abuse. And the willingness of large organizations to actually deal with it, to see it and want to deal with it.
Yeah.
So when you talk about Bitcoin, you talk about Treasury or JP Morgan Chase, can we avoid them from coming in there and screwing it all up?
Well, they're open protocols. I mean, that's really the game changer here, right? I mean, the problem with the incumbent financial system is the incumbents control the gates.
It's a monopoly.
Yeah, it would be the analogy of if Google had to go to the New York Times and ask if it was okay to start doing searches, never would have happened. They were able to grow because they had this protocol, HTTP, they just build and go. And that's where they're the game changer here. The Bitcoin protocol, the Ripple protocol, they are available now to everybody on Earth to build. And I think you just can't stop that. Now, does that mean we should be flippant about it and say, well, screw taxes and regulate? Absolutely not. Just the opposite. The regulators, particularly law enforcement. If you get law enforcement on your side here, we're in really good shape, right? So there's other regulation, but that's really, if you got law enforcement against you, and we can be all high and mighty about it, but this thing is just not going to roll. So we've got to work with them. But I think you can make the case that these things, again, I'll say again, they should really start seeing this as a superior way of catching the bad guys than the current systems you have, which are very slow. And to your point about all the incumbents doing all kinds of bad things, you're right, that happens. So I think we can make the case these are better systems for
What do you think of his comment about law enforcement?
I think that the biggest problem that Bitcoin has is that it's the best money the world has ever seen. And I think that this is true of cryptocurrencies broadly speaking. The important thing to remember here is that it's not about Bitcoin, it's not about Ripple, it's about cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is going to change the world. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
Thank you so much. This has been a great panel.